Coming up on Arirang News, data shows South Korea's income inequality has gotten worse in the pandemic. This year in the second quarter, with no relief payments, those in the lowest 20% saw their incomes decline by 6%, but pay went up for the top earners. A South Korean court orders the seizure of assets in the country owed to a Japanese company to compensate the Koreans Japan subjected to forced labor during World War II. Japan is claiming the order is a violation of international law. And coronavirus cases in South Korea on Thursday were back above 2,000, meaning the authorities will likely extend the distancing measures as they are. Experts are saying the Delta variant could mean the country needs a new approach to the rules. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea's average household earned income increased by more than 6% in the second quarter compared to a year earlier in the initial months of the pandemic. But inequality is getting worse. Those making the most saw their incomes rise, while the poorest saw a decline. Kim Sung-min reports.
The average South Korean household saw their earned income and property income increase in the second quarter. But due to the impact of last year's COVID-19 relief fund, the total average income fell on-year for the first time in 4 years. The on-year drop in what is known as transfer income due to the government distributing relief funds last year caused this year's second quarter average income to fall by 0.7% on-year.
Public transfer income dropped 37.1%, and this is because the Social Security benefits generated by the Pandemic Relief Fund in May last year dropped sharply in the second quarter.
Excluding that specific category, the ongoing pandemic couldn't drag down any of the other average income category. Wage income rose 6.5% and property income almost 60% as housing prices continue to skyrocket. But taking a closer look at it, that wealth grew mostly for the rich. The highest 20% income bracket saw an increase of 1.4% on-year. Their monthly income was just shy of $8,000. On the other hand, the lowest 20% income bracket made 6% less than a year ago, an average of $823 a month, showing that inequality is widening. Expenses also jumped last quarter with a 31% increase in spending on education. But the largest expenses were still groceries, taking 15%, followed by food and accommodation. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
The South Korean government is going to expand a program giving free vaccines against cervical cancer to young women. Announced by President Moon Jae-in on Thursday, the free vaccines will be made available to all girls up to the age of 17, up from the current limit of 12, starting with those in low-income households. Cervical cancer is the only type of cancer that can be prevented by vaccination, but those vaccines were not yet available to everyone because of their high cost. Moon also said that the Korean government will boost financial support for people getting fertility treatments starting in the fourth quarter of this year. So far, that support has benefited more than 270,000 people. A Korean court has ordered the seizure of assets in the country owed to the Japanese company Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. This is to compensate the Koreans Japan subjected to forced labor during World War II, in line with a previous court ruling. But Japan is saying the order is a violation of international law. Yoon Jung-min reports.
Regarding a recent decision by a local court ordering the seizure of Japanese firm Mitsubishi Heavy Industries' Korea-based assets, Seoul's foreign ministry said they are currently monitoring the situation. This comes after the Japanese government protested against the ruling on Thursday, calling it a violation of international law and reiterating that the liquidation of Japanese companies' assets in Korea will result in serious consequences. A Korean court recently ordered the seizure of assets that Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries holds in Korea, following a South Korean Supreme Court ruling in 2018 that ordered the company to compensate Korean victims of wartime forced labor. The Anyang branch of the Suwon District Court recently ruled in favor of the family members of the victims, ordering the seizure of roughly $725,000 from LSM Tron, a Korean firm that owes the money to Mitsubishi. The families requested the seizure earlier this month as Mitsubishi continues to refuse to pay compensation. The amount consists of around $290,000 of compensation, with the rest coming from other costs, including a penalty for not paying on time. The Japanese company has been ignoring the 2018 order to compensate the victims, insisting the compensation issue has been completely resolved following a Seoul-Tokyo bilateral treaty in 1965. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
With home prices in South Korea, especially Seoul, having risen dramatically in the past year, the government is moving to ease the resulting property tax burden on homeowners. The ruling and opposition parties have agreed to raise the threshold at which homeowners start paying a property surtax called the gross real estate tax. They're going to raise that bar from homes worth 900 million won, about $750,000, to 1.1 billion won, a little over $900,000. The ruling party had proposed the tax ranges from around 0.5% to 3% of the value of the home. The ruling party proposed last month that the tax be applied only to homes in the top 2% in terms of value, but the conservative opposition had said that was unfair because the threshold would fluctuate too much. The proposal will be submitted to Parliament on August 25th. And South Korean lawmakers are pushing ahead with a bill that would inscribe into law its pledge to go carbon neutral by 2050. If that goal does become law, South Korea will join a number of advanced countries like Sweden and the UK that have legislated their own net zero targets. Lee Kyung-eun has this report.
South Korea takes its first step towards making its goal of becoming carbon neutral into law. The National Assembly's Standing Committee on Wednesday approved a bill aimed at solidifying the plan, which the government hopes to achieve either by reducing gas emissions from coal and liquefied natural gas, or replacing them with green hydrogen. Spearheaded by the ruling Democratic Party, the bill commits South Korea to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And as a midterm goal, reducing carbon emissions by at least 35% compared to 2018 levels by 2030. That's going to become South Korea's new nationally determined contribution, part of the global initiative to go carbon neutral in line with the 2015 Paris Agreement. The new NDC, which will be submitted to the UN in November, sets a strengthened target compared to its previous one, which says 24% below 2017 levels by 2030. The bill also promotes establishing related committees in both central and local governments, executing climate policies and transforming small companies into green businesses. Several advanced countries have already made their net zero targets into law. Sweden was the first country, pledging to become carbon neutral by 2045, 5 years ahead of the global timeline. France, the UK, and 4 others have subsequently set the same goal for 2050. South Korea was among the 6 countries or areas that had proposed legislation. And if the bill officially passes through Parliament next week, South Korea will be the latest country to have a legally binding goal of net zero carbon emissions. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, good afternoon. Thanks for coming on today.
Good afternoon, Devin.
Well, the big news overnight in the markets was the minutes from last month's Federal Open Markets Committee showing most Fed officials think they could start the so-called tapering of bond purchases this year. Apparently, they see growth and employment recovering sufficiently and progress toward their inflation goal as well. Tell us what came out of the Fed minutes.
The U.S. Fed's FOMC minutes gave a huge impact in global financial market yesterday and today. And U.S. Fed's tapering is one of the most important factors that determines the path of global financial markets because tapering means a higher interest rate and less liquidity in the market. The minutes of FOMC meeting did not show Fed officials arriving at a consensus about when exactly they should begin the tapering process. Quite a few Fed officials are saying that it is time for Fed to start tapering since U.S. economy is improving quickly. But other central bank people argue that U.S. labor market is not fully recovered from pandemic, so Fed should wait at least until significant signal of recovery. But it is true that overall the mood of the Fed is moving toward tapering.
As you say, Professor, the markets have been watching that situation intensely, and news of tapering possibly to come this year is what sent stocks sharply lower on Wall Street. The Dow and the S&P off more than 1%, and the Nasdaq close to that. Take us through the global markets.
U.S. stock markets lead in the final hour of trading after minutes from the Federal Reserve last meeting showed officials increasingly in agreement about pulling back on the central bank's asset purchases this year. Stock losses accelerated toward the end of trading session, leaving major indexes around session lows by the time of market closed. Dow Jones Industrial dropped by 1.1%, and Nasdaq also lost by 0.9% yesterday. All European markets and Asian markets also dropped due to U.S. Fed's closer tapering and spreads of Delta variants in the regions. London market dropped by 0.2%, and Shanghai market also dropped by 0.9% today.
And Korean stocks today down even more than Wall Street. It's been a couple of rough weeks for the local market. Just yesterday snapping an 8-day losing streak, and now down by almost 3%. Only a few really bright spots out there. SK Bioscience, some of the companies that went public recently like Kakao Bank and Krafton. Tell us about the domestic market.
Compared to other major markets in global market, there was a huge drop in domestic market today. Kospi lost by 1.9%, and Kosdaq even more lost by 2.9% today. Like other major markets in foreign countries, domestic market was much affected by increased possibility of U.S. tapering. As U.S. Fed's tapering comes closer, the possibility of Bank of Korea's interest rate hike comes closer too, which becomes strong negative effect on domestic market. In investor-wise perspective, the larger net sales by foreign investors became the fundamental driving force of the market today. In both markets, foreigners sold stocks 330 billion won in Kospi and 150 billion won in Kosdaq, respectively.
With all this uncertainty, we have seen a rise in the dollar index and investors moving there for safety. And as you say, Professor, there's been basically nonstop selling here in Korea by foreign investors. All that to say the exchange rate has risen sharply this week, the Korean won falling against the dollar. What do you see happening with the exchange rate?
As you said, Devin, Korean won depreciates quickly these days. $1 exchange rate increased up to 1,176 won per dollar today, which is the highest level or lowest Korean won value since September 2020. Quite a few factors that weaken Korean won is gaining power these days. First, foreign investors sell in domestic stock market lifts up $1 exchange rate. The net sales of foreign investor amounts to 7.5 trillion won over the last 6 trading days. Secondly, U.S. Fed's movements to tapering also strengthens U.S. dollar and weakens Korean won. Lastly, as Taliban takes over Afghanistan, higher geopolitical risk also added a demand for safe asset U.S. dollars. So overall, it looks that foreign exchange rate market would be more volatile until these factors phase out.
Well, finally, Professor, work is starting on the Korean government's budget for next year, and reports say it could top 600 trillion won for the first time. That'd be more than $500 billion. It's an increase, but a smaller increase than we saw this year, it seems, because of the issue of fiscal soundness. What can you say about that issue and next year's budget?
Korean government is seeking to draw up a national budget of around 600 trillion won or 513 billion US dollars for next year in a bid to maintain expansionary fiscal spending in the middle of pandemic. If this budget is confirmed by Congress, it would mark a 7.5% annual increase from this year's national budget. But the size of next year's budget may top 600 trillion won, depending on how the fourth wave of pandemic plays out, because the government is struggling to stem recent flare-up in COVID-19 cases amid a fast spread of highly transmissible Delta variant and slow vaccination. However, as all sovereign rating companies point out, fast increasing government debt is one of the largest risk factors of Korean economy in the future. It looks that government debt to GDP ratio, which is the barometer of fiscal soundness, is expected to exceed 50% next year. So it is time to begin to control government debt size by shrugging off political pressure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works out as lawmakers work through that budget planning process. Professor, thanks so much for sharing your insights today with us. We always appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
South Korea today reported more than 2,000 new cases of COVID-19 for the first time in over a week. The government's expected to announce tomorrow whether it's going to keep the distancing rules as they are, and it seems likely that it will. Our Kim Hyun-sung spoke with an expert about whether these measures are enough to deal with the Delta variant.
South Korea on Thursday reported 2,152 new COVID-19 infections. Of the new cases, most were local transmissions. But an expert says that this number could double.
Fewer people are getting tested now than during the third wave. It's hot, so healthcare workers are probably tired and people are reluctant to get tested. If we test 1 million people like in the UK, COVID numbers could double or even triple.
The death toll has increased this week as well, with COVID-19 claiming 53 lives, almost double the death toll of last week.
From what we understand, even though there has been an increase in deaths, the mortality rates are staying roughly the same. More people have died because more people have been infected.
The South Korean government will announce Friday morning whether it will extend the current level 4 social distancing measures. But one expert says the current measures just won't cut it.
The current distancing measures were made before the spread of Delta, so they're not quite effective. We need new or extra measures that minimize personal contact and expand testing. Also, if we are to truly live alongside COVID, we need an oral medication like Tamiflu.
An oral medication will come out later this year, sometime around November or December. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Health officials in the U.S. say COVID-19 booster shots will be rolled out for Americans starting in late September, in view of data showing that the vaccines lose their efficacy over time. For now, this is for people who got the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines, but it'll likely apply also to those who got the Janssen shot. Kim Bo-kyung has the details.
The U.S. will offer COVID-19 booster shots from late September to maximize vaccine-induced protection and prolong efficacy. While urging the unvaccinated to get their shots and wear masks, President Joe Biden during a briefing on Wednesday said the booster shots will be ready in the fall, after a joint statement was released by public health and medical experts from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Earlier today, our medical experts announced a plan for booster shots to every fully vaccinated American, adult American. You know, this will boost your immune response. It will increase your protection from COVID-19. And it's the best way to protect ourselves from new variants that could arise.
The country will offer booster shots for all eligible Americans beginning the week of September 20th for those who have seen 8 months elapsed since getting their second dose of either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. Those who got the Janssen vaccine will also likely need a booster shot. The joint statement says The measure comes as data shows the effectiveness of vaccines begins to decrease over time following the initial doses, and in association with the dominance of the Delta variant, shows reduced protection against mild and moderate disease. Yet, according to an expert in the field, the Food and Drug Administration's decision must be waited for.
They're primarily basing this decisions on thought that those people who are sort of waning in their antibody levels would be prone to getting reinfections or breakthrough infections. But even though that is theoretically possible, we are not clinically seeing that in the real world. So we would have to still wait and see what the FDA decides on this matter.
Meanwhile, regarding voices raising concern over the fact that Americans will get an additional dose while much of the rest of the world remains unvaccinated, the statement said that the U.S. will expend efforts to increase the supply of vaccines for other countries, adding to the 600 million doses it has already committed to donating globally. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korean President Moon Jae-in will be hosting a summit at the Blue House next week with the President of Colombia, Ivan Duque. The Colombian president will be in Korea on a state visit from August 24th to the 26th, with the summit scheduled for day 2.
President Moon will hold a summit with President Duque on the morning of August 25th and host a banquet in the evening. The two leaders are expected to discuss ways to develop bilateral ties, cooperate in the post-pandemic era, and share views on global and regional issues.
The two sides are expected to foster partnerships in bio, agriculture, and eco-friendly infrastructure. Climate action is also on the agenda, as Colombia is the next host of the Partnering for Green Growth, or P4G Summit in 2023, which South Korea hosted earlier this year. President Moon will also ask for Colombia's continued support regarding the Korean Peninsula peace process. The visit comes on the 10th anniversary of establishing a strategic partnership and 7 decades since Colombia came to South Korea's aid in the Korean War. It'll be South Korea's first in-person summit with a Latin American country since the COVID-19 pandemic began. The vice foreign ministers of 20 countries, including South Korea, held a conference call Wednesday night to discuss the situation in Afghanistan. Seoul's foreign ministry says it was attended by Vice Minister Choi Jong-moon and lasted for about an hour. It was led by U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman and was attended also by her counterparts from Japan, Australia, India, and the U.K. They reportedly agreed that the international community should try to ensure stability and evacuate their citizens from Afghanistan as quickly as possible. This past July, it turns out, was the world's hottest month on record. According to the U.S. National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, the global surface temperature in July stood at 16.73 degrees Celsius, which is 0.93 degrees higher than the 20th century average. The agency said this is a sign that what it called the disturbing and disruptive trend of climate change is getting worse. The record heat last month is believed to have contributed to a series of environmental disasters, from heat domes across North America, Europe, and Asia to devastating wildfires on multiple continents, even in Siberia. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.